number one is going to be autoimmunity. There's so much autoimmunity in this world. 50% of commercial insurance dollars go to treat autoimmunity, and it's a completely reversible condition. That's wild. We were never taught that in conventional medicine, and still today, doctors don't believe autoimmunity is reversible. But I used to be kind of scared to say it, but I've seen it enough. There's no patient that we haven't been able to reverse. Some take a lot longer than others and are more difficult than others, but there's always a root cause. If they're patient and willing and committed, it's reversible.
Welcome, Dr. Oubre. Thank you so much. I've been waiting a long time to get you on the show here, and I really appreciate you taking the time.
Well, thanks, Dr. Carter. I appreciate it. I'm anxious to share what I have and kind of anxious to hear more about your stuff yourself.
Yeah. So why don't you, for the listeners and viewers, tell us a bit about your background and what got you into private practice?
So, I'm a family practice doctor. So as going through residency and things, it was always all about becoming private practice. But I'd say more specifically, becoming a functional medicine doctor was an unusual calling that came to me, and I wasn't really expecting it. I wasn't raised in a holistic background. I certainly ate my fair share of Doritos and Coke Zero and all that junk food. And actually, it was kind of Austin that brought me to functional medicine, because Austin's a pretty holistic town. And I had patients that were coming to me taking vitamins and things. And I was doing some advanced lab testing because the doctor I was working for was doing it. And lo and behold, it was kind of like pulling on the thread of a sweater. Like, why are you taking this vitamin? And oh, wow, that actually did something. And looking further into it. And why are you going gluten free? And just kind of keeping an open mind. I think that's a big problem with most physicians is we come out of medical school being the lions in the jungle as MDs, and we think we know everything. And if you don't have an open mind, you can't experiment with those new things. And so luckily, I think I had just enough of an open mind to see some of the possibilities with functional medicine. And as I started getting into it, I'm like, well, if this is possible, what else is possible that I haven't been taught and didn't even realize? And so I've been doing functional medicine now for about 6 years. And Jared, I've seen things that are reversible that conventional medicine to this day still says is irreversible and impossible. And not tooting my own horn or anything, but we have lab tests to prove that these things are actually reversible. You can measure them, you can see them. Not only do patients feel better, because that's the big thing, like, oh, they just got lucky, that patient just got, it was just luck that their disease was going to go away anyway. Well, you've got markers before, you've got markers afterwards. There's only so many times you can say the patient got lucky. But so many docs are closed-minded. So anyway, that's getting on a tangent. But that's how I got into functional medicine. Was luckily my patients came to me doing things, and I was open enough to receive those things, and then spent lots of money learning functional medicine after that.
Yeah. I'm just curious, what are some of the things that to this day your conventional medical approach would say is not reversible that you've seen, yourself to be reversible? What are some of those things?
The two big ones, and we could go on and on, but the two biggest ones are, number one is going to be autoimmunity. There's so much autoimmunity in this world. 50% of commercial insurance dollars go to treat autoimmunity, and it's a completely reversible condition. That's wild. We were never taught that in conventional medicine. And still today, doctors don't believe autoimmunity is reversible. But I used to be kind of scared to say it, but I've seen it enough. There's no patient that we haven't been able to reverse. Some take a lot longer than others and are more difficult than others, but there's always a root cause. If they're patient and willing and committed, it's reversible. That's number one. Any autoimmune disease is reversible. There always needs a little asterisk out there saying that some autoimmune diseases create destructive mechanisms, and that destruction is sometimes irreversible. So like a type 1 diabetic, the underlying autoimmune disease of type 1 diabetes is the active destruction of the pancreatic cells, the beta islet cells. Once you run out of beta islet cells, you will be a type 1 diabetic forever, but you still have an autoimmune condition that if you were given more beta 1 cells, you would kill them also. You can reverse that ongoing underlying disease, that autoimmune disease, so that you wouldn't destroy future beta islet cells. But once they're destroyed, they're gone. So like rheumatoid arthritis, if you destroy your joints, that needs stem cells and other things to repair. That part's not reversible, but the ongoing rheumatoid you can reverse. So number one is almost all autoimmunity. And I say almost because I haven't proven reversal of all of them, but there hasn't been one we haven't proven reversal. Number two is heart disease is a big one. So now, once again, a heart attack destroys heart cells. And once those heart cells are dead, they do not come back. There's a scar there. Just like if you get a surgery and someone cuts you, there's a scar there. There will be a scar there forever. But the actual blood vessels feeding the heart, the disease that's causing the heart attack, as far as the narrowing of the arteries, the atherosclerosis, whatever you want to call it, it's totally reversible. And we've seen it so many times now that it's not even something that I even question anymore. It's not a, can you reverse it? It's, how are you going to reverse it? How long it's going to take? And are you going to lose any tissue in the process? Because if you already have disease, there's possible you could still have a heart attack at that moment. Until we start reversing it, takes you out of the risk category. But we see it all the time. It's wild.
I know with autoimmunity, there are a huge variety of manifestations of autoimmune disorders, right? So with each individual one, do you find that there's also a huge variety of ways that you have to go at it to get rid of it? Or is it like with something like multiple sclerosis? It's like, we know this is happening and this is the kind of, not cookie cutter, but this is the path to get there? Or is it like, we got to figure out, 10 different factors and then decide how to go at this thing?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And the true answer is that every autoimmune condition has a unique trigger, and very few autoimmune conditions share that trigger. So celiac disease is the only known autoimmune condition where you know the trigger and it's easy to remove. You eat gluten, you have celiac disease. You don't eat gluten, you don't have celiac disease. That's the only known autoimmune condition. But it's because the other triggers for autoimmunity are typically related to foods, related to gut bacteria, related to chemicals, toxins, molds, those kinds of things. And what it's done is it's tricked the immune system into thinking that something is dangerous and needs to be attacked, and that something that it's attacking looks just like your other tissue. Okay. So an example of that is if you have leaky gut, and leaky gut, say, I like to use spinach as an example because it's a perfectly healthy food. Say you have leaky gut, and we can get into the details of that. But the idea is if spinach crosses your barrier into your body, your immune system attacks it. Spinach is never supposed to get into your bloodstream. If I injected you with spinach, you would get an immune reaction. You'd probably die, but you'd get an immune reaction to that spinach, right? And so if whole spinach, crosses the barrier into your intestinal cells, your immune system attacks it. And there's something called molecular mimicry, that the 3D structure of spinach may look just like your thyroid gland. So your immune system's attacking spinach in your bowels, but actually now it's collateral damage unintentionally attacking the thyroid. So if you can find the underlying cause or the underlying trigger and remove that, then all of a sudden the autoimmunity goes away. So for that person with autoimmune thyroid, if their trigger is spinach and they stop eating spinach, they are literally, I don't like to use the word cured, but their autoimmunity is reversed. So to kind of more formally answer the question is, there's no unfortunate one way to heal any and all autoimmune conditions. But in my practice, I've kind of developed this hand metaphor. And so the people listening won't be able to see the hand. But the idea is you've got 5 fingers on your hand, and we always treat people basically this exact same way. Everyone is a unique individual, and so runs into roadblocks and hiccups and here and there. So although we have a kind of cookie cutter for every patient that comes to see us, I'm going to take them through almost the exact same steps that I take every patient, but they all end up on a unique path because of their individualities. And so the very first thing is your thumb. We like to call the thumb is the gut, because an opposable thumb is really what separates us from other mammals and things, right? The ability to touch all of our fingers is a big deal. So the thumb is paramount to the other fingers in order to grasp and hold things. So the thumb is your gut, because without an intact gut, none of the other fingers matter, because your gut is both your portal into your nutrition, but it's also the way you get rid of toxins and things. So without a good gut, you can take the greatest CoQ10 in the world. It's not going to do anything. You can eat the greatest food in the world, but you are what you absorb, not what you eat. So that's a common thing we like. You're not what you eat, you are what you absorb. So if your gut is broken, you're not going to be absorbing the good foods. And then if your gut is broken, you've got all these inflammatory creatures in there, whether it's bacteria, yeast, fungus, whatever is in there. And those are all inflammatory issues. So the number one thing we take every patient down, no matter where they are, no matter even if they are a toxic issue, you still have to fix the gut first. And that is the number one thing so many functional medicine doctors around the country miss, is they don't know how to fix the gut. They don't know what to do, or they think if they just change someone's diet, the gut is done. The gut is incredibly complex and incredibly difficult to fix. And it can take up to 18 months for someone to truly fix their gut. Now with supplements and things, we've really got that squeezed in a lot faster into like a 6-month, maybe 8-9 month paradigm. But most people underestimate the power of the gut before they start launching into the other 4 fingers. So their 4 fingers are representations of toxic burdens, and they're very vague toxic burdens. But the other four categories are biological toxins. And biological toxins, I mean things like yeast and bacteria and things. There's all kinds of things in your gut and your sinuses and your lungs that are making biological toxins every day. And those biological toxins trigger inflammation, and inflammation causes autoimmunity. Number two is mold toxins. Now, mold toxins are technically a biological toxin, but they get their own category because they're very difficult, very annoying, very hard to find, and people are usually living in it. So mold gets its own category of special problems. Then number three is chemicals, environmental chemicals. So think of Roundup and makeup products and soaps and non-organic foods, pesticides, all that stuff goes in that bucket. And then last but not least are heavy metals. And so heavy metals get their kind of own category because they're the only ones that are detoxed completely different than the other three fingers. So the other three fingers typical go through liver issues and glutathione pathways and traditional detox. If you ever see someone saying, oh, do a 10-day detox or whatever with me, that gets those three toxins, but it doesn't touch heavy metals. Heavy metals can only be removed through a process called chelation. And in my opinion, it requires drugs. There's a lot of people out there saying that cilantro and things can help you chelate, but they're nothing compared to what drugs can do to pull metals out of your body. And so that was a long answer.
I know, you might have like 1,000 questions, which is usually so. Let's see. Just on that last point with heavy metals and chelation, how would someone begin to suspect maybe that they have any heavy metal issues? And then I'd love to hear what does this chelation process look like?
Yeah. So the wonderful part about functional medicine right now, and I really, my hat goes off to all the practitioners that have been doing this for years and decades before me, because I'm spoiled. Nowadays, if we say you've got candida overgrowth, we can literally prove that you have candida overgrowth or disprove that you have candida overgrowth. There's so many things in functional medicine you can literally test for now. Whereas these guys that have been doing this for decades, they didn't have the lab test to back it up. They were made fun of. They're witch doctors. I'm still called a witch doctor, and I've actually got the proof of what I'm doing to treat it. And I can show that my treatment actually gets rid of whatever this lab abnormality is. So the answer to kind of all of that is you can test for each individual thing. And so we do in our patients. There's a lot of testing always costs money. So we always try to meet the patient where they're at is, I'd rather you spend money on a treatment that we think you need rather than spend money on a test to find out you have a problem that then you have to spend money on the treatment. Mm-hmm. So money is finite. So we'll commonly try to come up with clinical cases that's like, okay, we've seen this before, and most likely this is a candida, or your symptoms match candida or whatnot. And so we'll go with it. But heavy metals, this is actually one of the reasons why heavy metals are, they're taboo subjects. Even in the functional medicine conferences I go to is IFM, Institute of Functional Medicine. That's who I'm certified through. And they don't actually teach heavy metal chelation anymore because it's so taboo. And one of the reasons it's taboo is because for years, and even still, doctors were chelating people without having any proof that someone was overloaded in heavy metals. And the downside of these chelating agents, these drugs, they remove beneficial metals. They're going to grab something. When you give it to someone, they're going to grab something. And if you don't have lead and mercury and arsenic and cadmium, then it's going to grab zinc and selenium and manganese and molybdenum, all the beneficial minerals. So you can literally harm someone with chelation if they don't have metals on board, heavy metals, bad metals. And of course, if you're not replacing those minerals, you can harm them. So we never, ever chelate someone without proving that they have heavy metals on board. And the way to prove someone has heavy metals on board is the same drug you use to treat them, you use to test to see if it's in there. So we give you this chelating drug, and there's a long story. We only do IV right now because the oral version is actually on a 2-year back order now. And so we do an IV chelation challenge where we give you the IV drugs and we collect your urine for 6 hours. And basically, if you've got heavy metals, those chelating drugs are going to grab those metals and carry them to your urine. Then we test your urine. And if your levels are high, it says, well, there's more inside. So you need more treatments, basically.
Oh, wow. So it sounds like a kind of an intense process, but a super important one. I've heard some bad stories about what heavy metals in the system can do. What kind of symptoms do you commonly see people have if they've got that stuff inside them?
So that's one of the hardest parts when you're really trying to detox people, is that any toxin can cause any issue in any person, right? I love to point out Flint, Michigan, those poor people there in Flint, Michigan. They were all exposed to lead, but you didn't hear everyone got skin cancer, or everyone got throat cancer, or everyone got psoriasis. It's your own biochemistry that allows you to create your own issues. So mold toxins, yeah, they like to call specific things, but metals are one of the most vague things. You can never look at someone and say, oh, you're a mercury case or you're a lead case. The only way we can kind of narrow down who has metals and who has it is just by their environmental exposures. So recently we had a lady who's been struggling with, she's had psoriatic arthritis, so psoriasis that's affecting her back. And she's had ulcerative colitis for years and years. And so she came to see us, and she was living in mold. So we got the mold out, treated her, has been doing fantastic, but she cannot get off of rheumatologic drugs. She is still on IV, I don't know if it's IV anyway, she's on some sort of autoimmune drug. And despite doing all of these right things, and so we've known this for a while now, I think a year and a half, she's been my patient, maybe 2. And she spent a lot of time in a gun range, sweeping up, shooting guns and sweeping up. And she loves to point, or didn't let us, she's pointed out that nowadays there's all kinds of HEPA filters and special vacuums and all kinds of regulations. And she's like, I was doing this 20 years ago and we had a broom and stuff was just in the air. And so finally we convinced her to do the heavy metal testing because there's so much taboo and fear around it. People are kind of scared to do it. And it's of course a cost. So we do it. And she's one of the top 10% worst heavy metal cases we've seen. And so when we look back at her results, we say, you fixed your gut. We've gotten rid of the mold and we've proven all these things, right? We've gotten rid of all 4 of these things. We've tested you for food sensitivities and nothing's really showing. The big remaining thing is heavy metals. This is most likely your cause. And so all the other things we did drastically reduced her symptoms and drastically reduced the medication she's had to take. But if you don't get their underlying trigger, you can't fix them.
Yeah. Wow. And you mentioned, everyone's different in how they present symptoms. And it just kind of popped up in my head, like my experience with gluten intolerance, that, until I actually saw a functional med doctor years and years ago, and got tested, I never suspected it because I never had, pain in my belly. And that was right. like, okay, well, I didn't know much about it at the time. And it was like, well, I was surprised when she said, yeah, you got a significant intolerance to gluten. And I do. And now, when in my symptoms have always been phlegm and like cough, like phlegminess, clearing my throat, and it would kind of open me up. I thought I had seasonal allergies year round. I don't. I react to oat.
Too. That's funny.
Then I get off gluten. I'm like, oh, actually, it's just in April, May, oat, and I'm okay. But for me, it was kind of that phlegminess that is how it presented. And same thing with dairy. So, on the gluten topic, since that's such a big one, I mean, what do you typically do when it comes to that? Is there anything beyond just removing it from the diet that you have your patients do? Like, is there a certain level of, like you'd said, with healing the gut that, there's been damage done, and what does that look like with healing the gut? If you have an intolerance that you've removed, but it's like, well, what do I do now other than just removing it?
Yeah. So there's the way to kind of summarize that is the gut restoration. They call this 5R, and I never get all the R's, but the idea is you have to remove all of the inflammatory triggers. It's kind of like trying to build a garden while someone keeps lighting it on fire. Like, it's not going to get anywhere, right? So if gluten's your issue, if dairy, the 2 things we always remove from anyone and everyone. And I literally mean anyone, everyone. I'll tell my friends, I'll tell my family, no one needs gluten or dairy to survive. And they are the 2 most common triggers in America. I don't want to speak about other countries, although it's in other countries too. But gluten and dairy, no one needs it. So one of the first things, if you're struggling with anything, including allergies, myself included, Dr. Carter, I thought I had daily allergies, but I never tested for anything. And it was gluten and dairy. As soon as I removed those, I've never had allergies again. Luckily, I don't have the April, May oak at all. But, so yeah, you have to remove inflammatory triggers, and you have to be honest with yourself, and you really have to become body aware to find out what you might be reacting to, because gluten and dairy may not be your biggest trigger. Eggs might be your biggest trigger. But how do you find that out? You have to remove certain foods and then add them back in. The cheapest way to do a food sensitivity test is to drastically reduce your food consumption to not calories, but types of foods to the most non-inflammatory foods, and then add them back in one at a time. And so the most non-inflammatory food or anti-inflammatory food plan that we use is AIP, and anyone can look it up. Go AIP diet, autoimmune protocol, autoimmune paleo, whatever you want to call it. And you can do that. And whatever symptoms go away, was one of those foods. And then if you want to, you can start layering them back in. But a lot of times we just hold people on AIP and say, we don't know what your triggers are, but we need to keep those triggers out while we do all those intestinal healing. So the other components you would do in this whole metaphor of building the garden is you want to fertilize the soil. So the soil needs good nutrients, of course. So you're not just eating, so you're on AIP, but you're not just eating spinach over and over again. You're eating a wide variety of vegetables, lots of color. Nutrition is the most important part if I haven't honed that in yet. And then, of course, to fertilize the soil, you want to add probiotics. So you would take probiotics, and then you want to try to heal the lining of the gut or the lining of your garden. And so we do a lot of supplements for that. Glutamine is a popular one. One of my favorite ones is called 2-fucosylactose, which is just a prebiotic, a fiber of sorts. 2-fucosylactose, 2FL, is actually a fiber made in human breast milk. It's not made anywhere else. So it has magical properties for people, 2-fucosylactose. Glutamine, and then there's tons of other stuff, marshmallow root and slippery elm, all kinds of stuff that heal the gut. But I want to make sure to drive home the point. The biggest part is nutrition. You can't keep burning your garden if you know you're reacting to something like gluten and dairy.
I mean, speaking from experience, I love cheese.
Me too.
How do you help patients to make what seems like kind of a burdenous process, not necessarily easy to make these huge life changes? Are there tricks of the trade that you've been able to kind of help people to make the changes that are needed without it being so kind of burdensome and so such huge changes all at once? Or how do you guide people through the process?
Yeah. So luckily I really have to give a lot of credit to my nutritionist, because a lot of times I get to say, hey, you need to do this, go see my nutritionist, and they do all the work. So thank you to my nutritionist out there working hard. But we've learned tricks along the way, and I've kind of found that there's two types of people. Some people are just like, I want to get better now. You tell me whatever. If I have to go eat grass out in the yard, I will go do it. I don't care. I just want to feel better. And so those people, you can just give them whatever and they will kind of figure it out. You just tell them what they can eat and they'll make it happen. But then other people like myself take years to make their nutritional changes. So for me, going gluten-free took at least a year. Cutting dairy out took another year. And ultimately, and I was still not even free. I was still like maybe 80% free. But what made the biggest change to me, and so we try to focus on this with our patients, is that if you become body aware and you learn what that food does to your body, like you just did, right? If you learn what that food does to your body, it becomes easier and easier to turn away. Because let's face it, the foods that we're supposed to avoid, gluten and dairy, most people like. They love cheese. They love bread. It tastes good. So you've got this perfect brain trigger that goes off when you eat those foods of happiness and delight and just magic on your palate, right? So but and then the food reaction typically doesn't happen for hours later. So you have the dopamine hit, that wonderful feeling, totally separated from the negative connotation. So what people have to start doing, and we help coach them into this, is, hey, you know how every bone in your body hurt 2 days after you ate that gluten? Remember that was a gluten trigger. And the next time you go to eat that gluten, just remember you're choosing to hurt in 2 days. And as you start to do that, you unwrap that magical palate hit, that food addiction that hits you, because you realize that I'm signing up for pain in 2 days. Or for me, I can count. It's to the day. I've now got it mapped out. If I eat dairy, I will also have the runny nose, but that's become a minor issue. I will have acne 3 days later, and it will last for 6 days. And that's it. And then it's just over. Any dairy exposure causes that for me. So if I'm at a party or something and there's dairy and I'm going to eat it, I know I'm choosing to have acne for 6 days and 3 days. And so once people understand that, then they get power over the food instead of the food having power over them, because humans only have so much willpower. There's only so much we can turn away. But if we apply logic to it, then we can harness our own reasoning and kind of overpower it. Okay. And not necessarily just have to white knuckle it.
And you said a few things there that kind of reminded me of my own experiences and also I'd say objections that some out there might be having. Like for instance, it's like, for me, excuse me, like right now, I had dairy.
Did you eat dairy?
Yes, literally had some happen in my coffee. Probably shouldn't have done that before recording this. Apologies. But at any rate, like, it's like being phlegmy to me, it's like, okay, it's not like I'm in pain. It's not a huge thing, but because of what I know, which is just enough to be dangerous, but also really because of all the patients I've had who have had these stories of like, yeah, I used to be so healthy and so fit. And then around 45, 50 years old, like the wheels just started falling off and they ended up with all these variety of medical issues and a lot of autoimmune issues. And then they had kind of recognized, working with someone like yourself, that a lot of it had to do with what they'd been eating their whole life and the damage it was doing. So while it's not a huge deal that I'm having to clear my throat now and again, to me, like on a symptomatic level in this moment, it also makes me wonder, I'm like, what am I doing in my body? What am I setting myself up for?
Exactly.
And so when people, I imagine that a lot of your patients are those that they're coming to you because they're already pretty, bad off and having a lot of symptoms and issues and stuff. But do you find that probably a lot of them were doing damage way before they started with you and maybe having some of these lower level symptoms or signs?
Absolutely. Autoimmunity typically starts 10 years before you even know it.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And so is there a way for someone to, other than just say, seeing someone like yourself and saying, do the full panel of testing on me, like, are there ways for people things that they could look out for that might say, hey, you know what, this might be a huge issue 10 years from now. Maybe I should look into it. Like, are there preceding symptoms or signs that are common?
Yeah. And once again, this is another testament to where we're at in functional medicine lab testing, is that you can test so much, and just basic inflammatory markers they're really not that expensive to get done. And any doctor can order them, but most don't, because they don't know what to do about them if they're there. So a simple HSCRP, high sensitivity CRP, it's not the best test in the world. It doesn't catch everyone. But if your high sensitivity CRP is over 1 and you don't have any problems, then you have a problem that you don't know about. And your body can only take so many insults before something happens, right? Oubre, one of my nutritionists, loves to tell the story of, if you have a little brother that comes up and pokes you once, not a big deal. But if they just poke, eventually you're gonna be like, stop that. That really irritates me, right? So that's the situation with dairy. So you have half and half in your milk every day. You get a little phlegm, no big deal. You do that for 40 years, and all of a sudden now you're dealing with early dementia or a heart attack or stroke. And you're like, well, why did this happen? I've been doing the same thing for 40 years. Why now? And really, I try to tell patients that this is a testimony to how awesome your body is, that it was able to take insults for 40 years before it actually had a problem. And so that's where people get lost, is, I feel fine, especially men out there listening, watching. We're all guilty of it, myself included, is that we feel fine, we're tough, we're rough, we don't need to get any testing. But truth is that if you have inflammatory markers, and I was that person also, I did my markers early in my 30s, and I had worse markers than some of my autoimmune patients. That I was the guy that was going to have a heart attack in a triathlon because I had terrible inflammation, was eating the wrong foods, and my body is just more sensitive than other people. Sure, there's other people that can smoke and drink and live to 90. That's not my body. My body would have been the one that broke down and died earlier. And so you have to accept your limitations as your body. Some people can live on 4 hours of sleep and drink alcohol every night, and that's okay, good for them. But if you're not testing your own levels to find out where you're at, then you don't know. And just because it's allergies for you, maybe it's cancer for someone else, or it's some sort of autoimmune condition that takes over their life. And man, once it happens, it becomes a quick regret, like, gosh, I wish I had changed sooner. Because unfortunately, once you flip your body into a autoimmune condition, it's much harder to reverse it than catch it and kind of prevent it. And that's the whole point of preventive medicine. But where my field is at, where I'm disappointed in my work colleagues and family medicine in general, is that their preventive medicine includes checking a cholesterol and giving you vaccines, and they call that preventive medicine. Now, preventive medicine is actually testing people to see what they might develop and then working to prevent that. So simple test anyone and everyone can do. I think our cash price for HSCRP might be $10, might even be $5. Cheap test, HSCRP, anyone can do it. Your level should be less than 1.
Okay. Very good. Anything else, like for those who are taking notes and like, okay, I'm going to go get my $10 HRSCP I think I've said that wrong, but any others that your go-to, like they're affordable, they're accessible, most places can do them. Any others that they should put on their list?
Gosh, I've got a laundry list of ones I could do, of course, but I'd say that this probably the second most important test is actually just an insulin level. So what is your fasting insulin level? Right now, medicine's at least doing a better job of screening people for diabetes, but by the time you've developed diabetes, just like autoimmunity, you've had insulin resistance for a decade or longer. So everyone should check their fasting insulin level. That means no food for at least 6 hours. Some people say 12, that's a bit much, but 6 hours minimum is plenty. And your insulin level fasting should be less than 4.5. If your level is any higher than 4.5, you have insulin resistance. And if you have insulin resistance, you have the likelihood of developing anything and everything, because sugar is the root of many evils, almost all evils. And they even call dementia now, which is on a complete rampage around our country, dementia they now call type 3 diabetes. Those are the people that may not have ever developed diabetes or had sugar problems as diagnosed by their doctor, but sugar wrecked their brain. So they ended up having dementia, but skipped the diabetes stage. So if your insulin is over 4.5, you've got to change your nutrition to get that insulin under 4.5, period. Okay. Two most important tests anyone can do, and they're cheap.
Okay, very good. I'm glad that we extracted that. Circling back just briefly before, I wanted to get into kind of immunity, immune boosting, COVID related stuff, obviously timely right now. But when someone is trying to make these changes and say they, like me, know they have some sort of a reaction or trigger with a dairy or gluten or whatever, alternatives, do you have any issues with the alternatives to dairy? Like, for instance, is sheep or goat's cheese, is that better for you, or is that still going to be a trigger with most people that have issues with dairy? Similarly, almond milk, soy milk versus regular cow's milk.
Right. So the alternatives from other mammals in general, we were never designed to suck on the tits of other animals, right? That just sounds weird when you say it that way. But when you say I'm going to go eat goat cheese, that doesn't sound like that, right? So I just want you to think if you're eating some sort of milk or cream, you're sucking on the tits of another animal, and that's just kind of weird. Okay. So the truth is that cow proteins in America, and you could get into, I think people have written books about why the cows in America are worse than the cows in Europe and other places in the country. But so the cow protein is the worst. Casein is the worst. Whey is less reactive, but casein is the big one. And so really that molecule looks very similar across the animal kingdom. So in general, we say dairy-free completely, no milk from udders. Not even humans, because that's kind of weird too. So some people can get away with goats and camels and all that stuff. I would say if you're healed, so say you're in your situation, Dr. Carter, where you get a little bit of allergies with dairy, you know your reaction when you eat cow milk. So try it with goat and try it with a significant amount of goat and see if you get that same reaction, or maybe get a different reaction. And so if you don't get the reaction, by all means, go for it. But that's also a place where you check your levels. If you're working on your diet and taking supplements and your HSCRP is sitting at 3, then it's time to get rid of the dairy. It's time to start getting rid of things until you can figure out what gets that CRP less than 1. Then once it's less than 1, if you want to add in gluten and dairy and other things, you're more than welcome to, as long as your lab markers approve of it and you limit it, right? So the animal proteins or animal milks were usually at least most of our patients are pretty sick by the time they come to see us. And then I'm sure kind of same for you. And then number 2, as far as nut milks are great. So any nut milk, seed milk, anything like that, those are great. No concerns there. We're not the biggest fan of soy. There's nothing wrong with soy. It's how it's raised, or not raised, it's not an animal, but how it's grown and treated in America, that soy is a problem. So I just want to clarify that. Avoid soy because of how it's grown and treated in America.
Okay. Very good. Okay. Well, let's get into the big topic, although that was just awesome. And I feel like I could just ask you questions for hours, but I can
talk for hours.
Yeah. We'll have to have a part 2, but I'd love to get into, your take on COVID as a whole, any kind of information that you find yourself repeating to your patients regarding the situation, and then maybe dive into some specifics on how people can help to keep their immune system strong and as resistant as possible, if they do get exposed.
The thing I keep saying over and over again is, of course, that COVID is an inflammatory virus. I think that came out pretty early on, this whole cytokine storm. That's an inflammatory reaction by your body. And so I love to point out the fact that the most likely reason why the elderly are dying much more than the younger kids is they've had more time on this planet to destroy their bodies. And so this goes back to exactly what we were talking about, is how many times are you going to stub your toe? Stubbing your toe once is no big deal. But if you stubbed your toe every day for 40 years, you'd probably have a really big foot problem. And so what's happening is these people, Americans, are notoriously not taking care of their bodies. We are the most obese country in the world. We have the most diabetes. We have the most chronic illness, yet we spend the most on our healthcare. And so if your body's already in an inflamed position, and then you get COVID, it just kicks you into this feed forward cycle. And if your body can't turn off that feed forward cycle fast enough, that's how you end up in a cytokine storm. And that cytokine storm just wrecks your body. So it's my opinion, and I can't, once again, I will always try to differentiate when I have opinion and actual biochemical background, but none of my patients have done poorly with the ones that have gotten COVID. Most of them feel like it's less than a cold, less than a flu, more than a cold. But no one's gotten seriously sick. None of my patients have been hospitalized, and I'm not using any drugs. I do not believe in hydroxychloroquine, whether I can get crucified for that or not. I don't care. I have not used any drugs on my patients at all, and just supplements and nutrition. But I believe the state of your health before you get COVID is your biggest predictor of how well or how poorly you're going to do. So there are supplements and things you can do for COVID-19. And I've put together what we call our COVID action plan. And it's a PDF file of a green, yellow, red kind of situation of, if you're just nervous and want to treat your body, then you take the green arrow supplements. And if you're sick but mild, you can do the yellow ones. And then if you're hitting the oh crap button, then you're taking all the red supplements. But one of the things in the COVID action plan, and people can go to my website, oubemedical.com/COVID-19, fill out the little form, and it'll send you the action plan and a whole bunch of other stuff for COVID-19.
Can you just spell out the URL real quick?
Oh, my last name is not that easy to spell.
If you're listening, they're typing it in. So,
so it's Oubre Medical. That's www.oubre medical, medical.com/COVID-19. And let me double check. It does not have a slash in it. It's just, or a hyphen. Yeah, it's just COVID-19, no hyphen. Okay, cool. And I think there's a link to it from the homepage too. And then there's a form there. Fill it out.
The website and everything. We'll put it on social as well.
Cool.
So that would be like kind of a starter point of, what you might look at with supplements. What are some of the primary things that you feel like everyone, maybe not everyone because you haven't tested their vitamin or mineral levels, but like generally what most people would probably benefit from getting a little bit supplemented into their diet?
So vitamin D has been, it's kind of a broken record, and I've kind of gotten fussed at over YouTube and stuff because I didn't recommend vitamin D. And the truth be told is it doesn't come to my mind because we put every single patient that comes into our office on vitamin D. So we test every single person's vitamin D level, and it's never good enough. So every person's on vitamin D in my practice. So it's not even in the COVID action plan because I suspect that you should already be taking, if you're listening to this podcast and you're not taking vitamin D, you need to go find a good quality one right now. Take 5,000 units a day, and you're going to have to check your levels. I encourage everyone to check your levels. Your levels should be over 60 at all times. But one of the most powerful studies I've seen to date is if your vitamin D level is less than 30, your outcomes with COVID are significantly worse. And there's no study to date, as far as I know, that had that kind of power, whether it be hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin or whatever it may be. Vitamin D was that simple, and it's cheap and affordable. So everyone needs to be taking vitamin D early on. Vitamin C and several other vitamins got a lot of credit, but vitamin D was the big one. So anyone and everyone should be taking vitamin D. And before you even take vitamin D, you better be changing your nutrition, because if you're eating hamburgers and French fries, you might as well not take the vitamin D. Well, that's not true. But I want to emphasize that if you're eating crap, it doesn't matter what vitamins you're taking. You can't outrun a bad diet. You can't supplement out of a bad diet.
Okay, that's good. That's a good point to circle back to. What about zinc? You mentioned C got some credit too, but I've read some stuff on zinc. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so that's another one that we test every patient for in my practice that comes in, is their zinc level. And so notoriously, we do see almost everyone's at least a smidgen low in zinc. And you have to understand that most of the patients that come to see us are usually at least a little health conscious. They may be sick and suffering from something, but usually by the time they've come to see us, they've usually at least started to change their diet, usually even taking some supplements. So if that type of patient is already somewhat low in zinc, then I would imagine if I tested traditional America who's swinging by fast food restaurants, their zinc is notoriously low. So zinc is a specific mineral that is heavily used in the immune function world. It's one of those minerals that is involved in the proteins of the immune system called zinc zippers, that those proteins just can't operate without enough zinc. So zinc is fairly ubiquitous. It's fairly easy. There's really minimal side effects of taking it, and it's cheap. So on our COVID action plan, that's one of our green supplements is a zinc supplement. Now, one of the downsides about zinc is that well, it's not really a downside, but my kind of belief is if you're going to swallow a pill, you should take more than just zinc, because zinc is actually, it's a very small amount, and it's the pill is a lot of filler sometimes. So we use the supplement from Metagenics called Immune Active. And the reason we use that one is because it's got zinc in it. And if you're going to swallow a pill, might as well put some other stuff in it, basically. And so the Immune Active has quercetin and vitamin C and NAC. I think it's even got elderberry. I'm not looking at the formula right now, but it's a great blend. I was really impressed when they came out with that right after COVID. It's like it was already in formulation. They just happened to get lucky that COVID came out and they released it. But it's a great one with zinc. It doesn't have a ton of zinc, but I really like the blend of things. In functional medicine, I think too many people get stuck on one vitamin, like, oh, this is the cure all. Like, no, there's no such thing as one cure all. I really like the synergy of multiple lower dose vitamins than any one high dose of any vitamin. And so that's why I like the Immune Active one.
And, speaking of the idea of multiple supplements, what does the data say about the ability for the body to absorb and really utilize? Let's say we had a perfectly healthy gut, that it was really absorptive. Is there any kind of limitation or things that we should keep in mind about maybe spacing out the taking of our supplements? Or has that been disproven in your body? If your gut's healthy, it's going to absorb. You can take 10 different vitamins at the same time and get it all. What does the data say on that?
I have a clinical opinion on that, not the data. My clinical opinion is people that make their supplement regimens too complicated don't take the supplements because it's too complicated. So you absorb 0% of something you don't take. So my general rule is I put people on twice a day supplements. You have your morning supplements, you have your evening supplements. You can take it if it's raining, you can take it if you're eating, you can take it if you're fasting. I don't care. As long as you put them in your belly twice a day, then you're going to at least absorb some of them. Is it the most ideal way? No, but we're busy people. And if you're stressing about the supplements you're taking in the right way, then that's not going to help you either. The other myth I like to dispel is that we don't really understand what all we absorb, what we need to absorb, and what has implications just in the gut itself. So just because something says, oh, this one's lipophilic or liposomal, that it's got better absorption, you may not even need to absorb that vitamin to get the benefits of it. There's all kinds of chemical reactions and hormone balances that happen just from the gut. If you eat spinach, there's not spinach floating in your bloodstream, right? That's not that I love to use spinach because it's a healthy food, right? But when you eat spinach, it breaks down into certain components. And yeah, some of those certain components get absorbed. Others stay inside the bowels to feed the organisms that you want to feed. And then those beneficial organisms actually do other things. So there's all kinds of studies on, oh, this curcumin's absorbed and this turmeric is full blend and all kinds of stuff. And I think we've almost scienced it up too much because we don't really know enough. One of my favorite ones is ashwagandha, which is good for adrenal glands. And someone was able to prove, we don't know the whole story yet, but someone was able to prove a long time ago that ashwagandha doesn't do anything inside the bloodstream. It actually stimulates or a probiotic feeds off of it, or it triggers a probiotic somehow, which the probiotic then manages our adrenal glands. It's not actually the ashwagandha that does it. It's mediated through a probiotic. So if you make that a liposomal, you might actually miss the benefit because it got absorbed instead of staying in the GI tract. I think I answered a totally different question than you asked, but that was fun.
Good to know. Just keep it simple. Don't worry as much about that stuff. Just keep it simple so that you do take what you need to take. No, I like it. Because I'm like, I've made it too complex with, especially adding new things in. I'm like, wait a minute, did I take the folate yet? Did I, crap, and I need one of those things, with all the different parts of the day in it. So yeah, I'll simplify.
Keep it simple, stupid. That's what we call it in medicine. Keep it simple, stupid.
Well, I did want to, bring up the fact that you are training for an Ironman. A lot of our listeners and people, that come and go from my clinic are similar athletes. And, but you have, of course, with your background, probably some information or some things that you're incorporating into your training to deal with, proper nutrition, performance related stuff, maybe recovery related stuff. Give us, what is your kind of personal, and what are your, I guess, functional medicine based additions to what you're doing, training for this Ironman?
Yeah, I'd say there's probably a lot of stuff we could talk about, but probably where my knowledge is a little more unique is a couple of things. And one is Ironmen don't actually have a better survival rate than the general population when it's been studied several times. That's somewhat controversial, but that's what I like to believe. And my opinion of that is because when you're running the Ironman, you exhaust a ton of calories. And so it's easy to stay thin and stay fit while eating Oreos and things because you just need the calories, right? So the number one mistake I see in these athletes that are doing incredible races and things, and why they might have earlier deaths and earlier heart attacks and stuff, we've seen it, right? Is because they're eating junk. So if you're doing something that your body is not supposed to do, let's be honest, our bodies were never intended to do an Ironman race ever. That's not normal. If you're going to exhaust your body even more, then you got to be putting in even better nutrition than if you're just sitting on the couch, actually. So that's my number one, is you got to make sure you're fueling. If you're sitting down at the dinner table with your family and you just ran 3 hours, then you need 2 or 3 plates of the exact same meal. You don't need to eat the same meal as your family and then go raid the pantry, even for the almond crackers or whatever it may be. That's another facade. A paleo muffin is still a frickin' muffin. Okay. There's still sugar and still bad stuff in it. So just because it's paleo and healthier doesn't mean it's good for you. So you've got to pack in the good nutrients. The second thing, I'm a big fan of nutrition, if you can't tell. The second thing is it's easy to pack in the carbs, and it's such a common thing where athletes carb load and do all that stuff. That is such old science. It is totally wrong. We are not supposed to be carb loading. That is not good in the athletic world. So one of my favorite things to do that I haven't seen a lot about in the athletic world is the race fuel that you do for refueling on the go. It's still very heavily carb based, but I like mixing in protein and fat with my race fuels. And so this is totally not my knowledge. I get it from Ben Greenfield. I love Ben Greenfield. And so in my race fuel, I actually mix, there's a stuff called Tailwind, which is pretty common. It's basically just the sugar and electrolytes drink. But I put 1 scoop of that, which is normally half the dose. Normally it's a 2 scoop thing. But I put in a scoop of some sort of amino acids, essential amino acids, and then actually several scoops. You want about 15 grams of amino acids. So per hour, basically, you want about 100. In my fuel, I have 100 calories of sugar. And 15 grams of this amino acid blend, and then a tablespoon of MCT. And so that way I'm not really overworking the digestive system, because on a race like that, if you're working your digestive, has that happened to you before?
No, I've had patients that way, and I was like, MCT oil, and, some people get a little bit of, looseness of the bowels, and you don't want to be on mile 115 when that happens.
Exactly. So make sure, to his point, that you've at least tested your bowels and you can tolerate the MCT. And I used to be really, really sensitive to MCT. Couldn't even put it in my coffee. And now I'm to the point where I can drink it in a race and it's no big deal. But it's not something you can just switch yourself to. Most people are sugar burners and they don't know it. And so switching to become a fat burner is actually harder than you would think. So it's a transition you want to do well before race day. And you need to be training your body that way.
And you in that state now, are you predominantly like kind of functioning in a ketotic state? Yeah,
absolutely. And actually one of my funnest things to do, if no one's ever tried this, is to do a long workout, like an hour and a half max. You can't do too long, but a long workout while you're fasting. Have you ever done that?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, I do a lot of fasting. Yeah.
Oh, have you ever done like a 72-hour fast and then worked out for an hour and a half? It is euphoric. It is, wow, it is unexplainable.
Wow. Oh, so you're coming off a 72-hour, is this just water fast only?
Yeah, so I'll let people do like coffee and things, but no calories. Yeah, no calories fasting.
And at the end of that, you just feel totally full of energy while you're working out and euphoric. That's cool.
And so usually when I do my 72-hour fast, I'll do workouts all along, and sometimes it might be an hour workout, sometimes it might be a 30-minute workout, but it is a weird euphoric feeling to work out while fasting. The first time that happened is when I was training for an Olympic triathlon, and I had never really run. I was never really a long distance person. And so I had never really run much longer than 6 miles. And I was fasting and I hit mile 4 and I was like, I'm feeling good. I'll keep going. And when I hit mile 7, I was like, I have to stop, even though I feel great, because I know I'm going to hurt myself if I keep going any longer. It is a weird euphoria.
Wow. And is there a physiological or medical or training reason that do you do that regularly? Do you do fast and then go into a big workout, or is it just that it happened to happen timing wise? And
no, I do them regularly and through training season, not too close to a race because it can be somewhat catabolic. But the idea is that when you're in a fasted state, and I don't want to say I understand all the science, or does anyone, but the idea is that when you're in a fasted state, your body's somewhat it seems backwards that if you're fasted that you'd break yourself down because you're not eating. But by fasting, you're actually waking up old archaic DNA that says, hey, we have to repair systems, we have to build, and we have to get ready, because if we don't find food soon, we're going to die. So it's this weird backwards response of when you eat nothing at all. Now, this is not the same as low calories. Calorie restriction is bad. Don't do that. But fasting has a completely different power of waking up old archaic DNA that really tells the body, get in a build mode because we've got to hunt food or we will die. And so you unlock secret powers that you didn't even know you had. They can't fast for too long. There's that caveat. And so usually the longest fast I'll do during training is about 3 days. People will do 5 days, but I kind of think 3 days, just my opinion, 3 days is plenty.
Okay. Do you also still take your supplements and vitamins while you're fasting?
I pretty much do, because there's nothing really that will lower my blood sugar or do anything like that. And I'm pretty always stressed. So I'm always on my adrenal supplements, fish oils and all that.
Okay. And that was one of the kind of questions that I've had, if I'm in the morning when I'm doing an intermittent fast, it's like, well, can I still take my vitamin D, and especially like fish oil, since there is some calorie to that. So is that usually enough to pull you out of a fast?
Not at all. And really, one of the things we will allow when people are early on fasting to get used to it, that's what I did to get acclimated to fasting, was we will allow them to eat fats only. So one of my cheats was coffee and putting just pure coconut oil, or I'll allow the coconut cream in the can. And so it's pretty much pure fat. The only thing that's going to kick you out of that fasted state is proteins or carbs, specifically carbs, but proteins can get converted to carbs and kick you out. So as long as it's fat only, it can actually settle the stomach and doesn't kick you out of the fast.
So when you say fasted state, I didn't expect we'd go so deep into fasting, but I'm
I love fasting.
Excited about it. So when you say fasted state, do you mean ketosis or other things beyond just the ketosis?
So fasted state basically just means an absence of insulin primarily. And so a fasted state will put you in ketosis. The hard part with ketones that I don't like to focus on is that a body that's truly fat adapted, ketone levels really won't rise that much, because if your ketone levels are rising too much, really high, it's actually because your body can't use it as fuel. So your ketone levels in a really fat burning state in a body that's used to fasting and ketosis, your ketones will rise to a certain level and then just kind of stop. So it's easy to test for ketones in a fasted state. You will have them, but really it's the magic of the fasted state. You don't have to check ketones. They're there.
Wow. So I've already got ideas for part 2. We got
all right, good.
We got paleo stuff. So I'm really excited about that, and I don't want to keep you too much longer right now. Thank you so much again. And so if there are those out there in Austin or beyond, do you guys do? I imagine you're doing telehealth treatments.
We're seeing people in person and telemedicine, and we've got online courses, so people that can't afford us can take their own courses online, do it yourself kind of style.
Very good. So what's the best place for people to check out their options with working with you guys?
Easiest way is just the website, oubemedical.com. Okay. I've got free content on YouTube and stuff, because we're always trying to put out content kind of like you are right now, and trying to get people healthier, do it yourself.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you again for your time. Really appreciate it. Look forward to part 2.
You're welcome. Thanks, Dr. Carter. Thanks for having me on your show, man.
Thank you again for tuning in to the Active Austin podcast, a production of Carter Physiotherapy. If you like living an active lifestyle in Austin, but pain or injury is holding you back, we have 2 completely free ways for you to figure out the underlying causes of your pain and the best steps for resolving it. First, check out our popular free report titled 5 Must-Ask Questions to Find the Best Solution for Your Pain. This quick-to-read report will provide you with important questions that you should ask about any treatment options you are considering. Just visit carterpt.com/questions and you can have it in your inbox within minutes. If you know you'd like to speak to a doctor of physical therapy, we happily offer free phone consultations to Central Texas residents. Just call us at 512-693-8849 or visit carterpt.com/phone. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.